that we must avoid as critical thinkers when attempting to study a culture that is unfamiliar is seeing the other culture as unsophisticated when set alongside with our own. Now, most of you probably think of knights, dirty peasants, poor hygiene, and a time of great intellectual darkness when you think of the medieval era. But in fact, this isn't true. The medieval era was actually a time of great cleanliness, and there were many great intellectual advances. Now, the medieval era is a very vast period, from 500 to 1500. Today I will explain to you why the medieval era is superior to the contemporary era, a period from 1945 to present. I have created a standard for what a successful society should have alongside with the basic standards of living. In order to be a successful society, you need the flourishing of the arts, protection both physically and economically, and advances in academics. The medieval era exhibits these characteristics better than the contemporary era. The first reason the medieval era is superior is because the arts are superior to the contemporary era. During the medieval ages, arts flourished and grew. The church promoted art by supporting artists with money. They did not hinder art with only being able to paint religious documents, as was seen in the East. Nancy Ross, PhD in art history, says the medieval age artists created more dimensions over the years and learned to add more details. Medieval architecture and craftsmanship is highly detailed and of great quality. The architecture in the medieval times was superior because medieval architecture really puts the time into designing and creating. Janetta Benton, PhD, in her book Materials, Methods, and Masterpieces of Medieval Art, states that the level of technical skill and manual dexterity displayed by the medieval artisans has rarely been equaled in any other time period. Now, contemporary art lacks this quality when compared to the medieval ages. In contemporary times, not as many new types of art have been formed. The new art created, such as pop art and abstract impressionism, are far less complicated types of work. New art focuses on lack of geometric shape, simple lines, and abstraction. Contemporary architecture and craftsmanship has little artistry and quality. We press our architects so much for time that we're actually losing quality in the art. Modern crafts are typically more about price rather than quality with the way our economy demands. Now that we have looked at the superiority of medieval arts, let's look at the higher security offered in the medieval times. People of the medieval era were protected with their currency and by their rulers. During the medieval era, safety was provided by lords. Working for a lord provided you with both a home and protection from outside enemies. Lords protected the serfs or tenants with a military defense. The medieval era also had financial security. People in the medieval era used coin money. Coins were made out of precious metals such as gold, copper, and silver. Precious metals are the most reliable source of currency because they hold their value. The contemporary era lacks these securities. The United States stopped operating under a form of the gold standard when President Richard Nixon abandoned it in 1971. Paper money has less stability, changing more dramatically with inflation. While there is some physical security in the contemporary era, nothing can protect the contemporary society from atomic warfare. Atomic warfare can create complete devastation on the world in a very short time, as we previously heard. We avoid severe military conflicts for fear causing nuclear destruction on the world. Now we have looked at the great art during the medieval times and the protections that were offered. Now let's look at the many great intellectual advances during the medieval era and how they were greater than their modern contemporary counterparts. The medieval era had many great inventions, literature and education. Many amazing things were invented. The type of inventions created are weaponry and war-related inventions, nautical inventions, farming inventions, timekeeping inventions, and general inventions. Inventions of the medieval era truly made life easier. There are also many great advances in academics. The very first emergence of universities was in the medieval era. The oldest is Salerno, which is stemming from a medical school. Many medieval scholars used a great deal of reason to explain things. And this contemporary era lacks the reason with its intellectual advances. The contemporary era is a great scientific era, but it just lacks the reason to back it up. According to Edward Grant, PhD, in history, who focuses on the history of science, we cannot say that the sheer magnitude of the quantity of information we have can guarantee a rational society. In fact, in modern times, we have seen a coexistence of reason and irrational persecution. The medieval era is easily superior to the contemporary era. We have seen this through the great intellectual advances, superior arts, and protection offered during this time.
There are many present-day luxuries that we can think of that make living in the contemporary era so ideal. A few that come to mind may include the internet, or modern technology, health and sanitation, or running water. But these are very superficial aspects of our society, and it is important to look deeper when comparing eras. The medieval era was the time between the years 500 and 1500, while the contemporary era extends from about 1945 with the end of World War II to present years. For the sake of this discussion, I'm going to examine both eras from a Western perspective, including Europe and the US respectively. Today I'm going to discuss why the contemporary era is superior to the medieval era based on a couple of criteria that make a good society. First, the contemporary era is superior because we as a people care more about the well-being and rights of other people. And second, the contemporary era is superior because of our opportunity for class mobility. First, the contemporary era is superior because we as a people care more about the well-being of our fellow humans. After World War II, the United Nations created the Universal Declaration of Human Rights as such a mode of promoting the well-being of other people. The Declaration comprised 30 fundamental rights for a democratic society. Representatives from 51 countries participated in the drafting of this declaration, which also incorporated a variety of legal traditions. Of the 192 member states of the UN, all have signed an agreement with this declaration and are obligated to abide by it. According to the UN Security Council sanctions committees, the committee can take enforcement measures to maintain or restore international peace and security. Such measures range from economic and/or other sanctions not involving the use of armed force to international military action. The rights discussed in the declaration include those pertaining to equality and fair treatment for all individuals. A few examples of the articles in this declaration include Article 1, which guarantees individual freedom by birth and equal rights, Article 7, which guarantees protection from discrimination under the law, and Article 18, which guarantees the rights to freedom of thought and religion and the freedom to change one's religion and practice it openly. The U.S. Bill of Rights also acts as a mode of ensuring people's rights. This contract was and is meant to protect individuals' natural rights under the government. Through the Ninth Amendment, it also guarantees individuals' rights that are not specifically denoted in the Constitution or the Bill of Rights. This contract acts as a living document that is applied in such ways as the modern court system. This application includes rights to representation by legal counsel, as well as the right to appeal. This protection is extended to all citizens equally in the face of the law. Second, the contemporary era is superior because of our opportunity for class mobility that wasn't available in the medieval times. This class mobility can take place on its own by individual choice. Since there is no true rigid class structure today in our society, people are not legally bound to a profession just by birth as they were in medieval times. People have the right to choose their career. This is another right guaranteed in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights under Article 23. People also have the right to change their career at will. In fact, according to a 2006 study by the Labor Department, the average person born in the later years of the baby boom held 10.5 jobs from age 18 to 40. Today's class mobility can also result from geographic mobility. The increase in ease of transportation across countries as well as in between them has made it easier for people to relocate for work in an effort to better their social status. For example, it only takes a little over 5 hours to fly from California to New York. The openness of today's global economy also influences how easily people can better their social standing. Today, countries can participate in trade with other countries, businesses can sell their products to other countries, and internet sales make it possible for people to avoid being geographically bound in business activities. Increased access to primary education has also allowed people of today's societies to attain greater class mobility than people in the medieval era. Primary education is widely available to people in Western countries and is even required by law in the U.S. Primary schools in the U.S. offer a general education that is not limited to one field of study. This broadens the possible career paths that students can take later in life instead of limiting them to a specific trade or field. This broad abyss of knowledge allows students to learn more than if they were solely taught the information necessary for a future career or trade. So we can see that some of the aspects of our society in the contemporary era that we may take for granted, including ensuring of certain human rights as well as the opportunity for class mobility, actually are some of the most pivotal in granting us the freedoms and opportunities unavailable in previous periods such as the medieval era. Thank you.
2.5 minutes.
Okay, so my opponent was talking about how we have a little bit more equality in the contemporary era. In fact, this isn't really that true. We had the Jim Crow laws in the contemporary period, and similar to the contemporary period, there's also slavery in the medieval times, except during the 12th century, we abolished slavery. Now, when we abolished slavery in the medieval times, the former slaves had the opportunity to work on land and pay rent. This is not similar to what happened when the abolishment of slavery happened in the 1800s. African Americans did not have these opportunities that the medieval slaves had. And another thing, there is not really equal classes in Europe and the United States. Modern capitalism is very similar to the feudal system. There's a tiny controlling elite at the top ruling over all the middle and lower classes. And the legal system in the modern era is based on the medieval era's legal system. When canon and civil law were reorganized in the medieval ages, it laid the foundations to the Western legal system. Also, the concept of corporation came from canon law, allowing commercial, educational, and religious organizations to reorganize themselves.
Two and a half minutes.
Okay, so one thing Daniel just brought up was that today we don't have perfectly equal class levels. Now, although this may be true, what I was specifying was the opportunity for class mobility in the contemporary era. So, yes, obviously there are, although much less rigid than in the medieval era, there are different levels, social levels in today's society. However, we have the opportunity to better ourselves through education, and people are more easily able to ascend out of their specific social class. Whereas in the medieval era, you were born into a class and a profession as well. Another thing Danielle brought up were the arts in the medieval era. Now, although the arts did flourish in this time, arts as a criteria for a good society is very subjective, and saying that arts in the medieval era are superior to arts in the contemporary era just takes us back to the Thomas Kincaid and Mark Rothko debate, where abstractism is a subjective desire in certain art critics, and so that's not really what defines a society. Also, academics in the medieval era, yes, we did see the beginning of universities that have still lasted today, but that's one of the big points. We still have university systems today, and actually, before the 7th century, most people were illiterate except for members of the clergy. So that primary education, teaching people how to read and write, was not allowed for common man. Thank you.
School administration, 3 minutes.
Okay, so the reason I was arguing that the arts in the medieval era are superior is not only because I think that the art styles were more complicated, but it's the fact that the art was of better quality. And actually all crafts were of better quality back then. The people who executioned the designs knew the materials better. So people who build the architectural structures you see in the medieval era, such as the Gothic cathedrals, they knew their material. These people were people who studied to be masons, and they knew how to work with all the material they were working with, unlike our contemporary architects. Also, I'm a little surprised I didn't get any questions about the medicine in the medieval era, because I know a lot of you guys probably think that medicine in the medieval era is very unsuperior, but there's actually quite a lot of problems with our contemporary modern medicine. In fact, like the Black Plague, we're also looking like we're going to have a serious epidemic on our hands, especially with all this traveling we're having around between countries, with our goods and people traveling through countries. In the contemporary era, we are actually more likely to have a worse epidemic, with millions of people and goods traveling through the world quickly, very quickly. We have planes and trains, unlike the medieval era. We also have a faster movement of microbial bacteria, especially with the lack of control we have for what travels in and out of countries. Unlike ancient societies, who usually had like a 7-year plan because they were prepared for famine, our countries are not prepared for this. We also have urban crowding, which is in the medieval era where you saw Black Plague was usually in the cities. So if you wanted to escape the plague, you would go out of the cities. But in our culture, we don't really have an escape. Everywhere is crowded. So this epidemic will spread very quickly. In fact, it's going to break all speed records held previously traveling. The medicine in medieval times was more than just bleeding out people with leeches, and if God said you did the wrong thing, you get sick. They actually had something called herbal medicine, which is very commonly used today, and people are going back to it. So there's actually some reason why people are going back to herbal medicine, because it works. So overall, because the medieval era is safer, we don't have to worry about nuclear warfare, basically creating our own type of virus or having a super virus knock us out. The superiority of arts and craftsmanship we have.
Thank you very much. Closing statement, 3 minutes.
Okay, in response to the comments made by Danielle about the superiority of the medicine in the medieval ages, yes, I am going to bring up the Black Plague, because your argument that that people in the Middle Ages could not fall victim to a super virus, that's exactly what the Black Plague was. In the few years that it existed in Europe, 1/3 of the world population, which was 45% of Europe itself at the time, perished in a matter of years. Also, regarding medicine, the lack of anesthesia at the time also made it so many of the modern surgeries that are very commonplace today could not exist. So medicine then was very simplistic, like herbal medicine, but certain diseases and conditions were pretty much hopeless for a cure or any sort of betterment through medical intervention. Even childbirth in the Middle Ages was pretty much a sort of a death sentence. Pregnant women were often encouraged to seek their final confessions with the church because of how dangerous it was to give birth in that time due to the lack or lesser sanitation than today, as well as the lack of anesthesia and other modern medical interventions that we may take for granted in the contemporary era. So overall, we've seen today how certain fundamental aspects that make a good society, including the promotion of human rights and equality for all human beings, as well as the opportunity for class mobility, are superior to some of the more subjective or superficial positive aspects of the Middle Ages. And I think that I hope all of you consider this in your daily lives and don't take for granted how much better we have it now than we would have a few centuries ago. Thank you.